I'm going to start our live transcript. So if anyone needs closed captions, they're good. And now I'm going to go ahead and let everyone in. And then once I see most people get their audio connected, I will make that quick announcement, turn it over to Al, and then on to you, Dr. Hammond. All right, thanks, guys. We're going live.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Sean Cottrell. I see that a good number of you already have your audio connected. We are going to be muting folks during today's session. And I really quickly want to do some housekeeping things. I'm going to turn it over to Al Zabchek. Everyone's going to be muted during today's presentation. If you do have any questions, feel free to hold those either to the end of today's session or write those in the chat at any time. And we will, again, have time at the end of today's presentation to address those questions that you guys are asking. Again, today's meeting, or this whole thing, is going to be recorded. So if you do have your videos on, those will be captured in the recording. We do plan on sharing this with other property owners who aren't able to make it. And again, I encourage you, make sure you're asking your questions. Let's get those documented and let's make sure that we get answers for those. So without further, hey everyone. So thanks. And if you do come off of mute, please stay on mute until the question and answer session. But at that point, we should be good to go. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Al Zabchek.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to first of all welcome the ACL board as well as the Conservation Committee, the general manager, the lake consultant, as well as the property owners at Apple Canyon Lake. At this time, I'd also like to welcome now Dr. David Hammond. He is an accomplished scientist on eradicating zebra mussels on lakes across the United States. He is recognized by the UMN Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Center, as well as the USGS Upper Midwest Environment Science Center for his work and publications on eradicating zebra mussels. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Hammond and turn the meeting over to him.
Thanks, Al. Thanks, Sean. And glad to have you all here today. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you some of my experiences combating this aquatic invasive species, zebra mussels and quagga mussels, which have become among the top 10 in terms of economic damage and environmental impacts, top 10 aquatic invasive species in North America. So they're causing a lot of havoc, both in the environment and in infrastructure, such as pipelines and boats and docks and power plants, drinking water treatment plants, those sorts of infrastructure. So we have a lot that we want to cover today. I'm going to go over a kind of a smattering of different experiences that I cobbled together for this particular audience. I'll start by just a little more background about myself. I have a master's of science and a PhD, both from UC Berkeley in California. My PhD is in agricultural and environmental chemistry. I also have a background working with algae, particularly microalgae. I worked for about 4 years in Guatemala, where I started a nonprofit organization that taught techniques of sustainable agriculture and something called permaculture. And later I was a consultant to Nike in a field called biomimicry, which is learning from nature and applying it to the design of more sustainable products and processes. I'm a co-author on 5 patents. 4 of those 5 patents have to do with pest control. I'm co-author of a book about green chemistry, and I'm at this point now a subject matter expert on control of invasive mussels. So I've got, I guess, 20 to 30 years experience working in pest control. and the last 10 or so with this particular one of quagga and zebra mussels. So just a little background on the pest itself. Zebra mussels are related to quagga mussels. They're both in the same genus, but they're different species of the same genus. These two photos make them look quite different, but in the field, it's often hard to distinguish them. You kind of need to be an expert in taxonomy to, really reliably determine which you've got. Just if you're wondering where the name quagga came from, there used to be an animal that's now extinct, but there used to be an animal in Africa called the quagga, and it was related to the zebra and looked kind of like a cross between a zebra and a horse. This is a photo of Davis Dam on the Colorado River, the time when these operators first discovered quagga mussels at their facility. They didn't know, but before the day of this photo, they didn't know they were there at all. And they pulled out this, they raised this large gate in the dam and were stunned to find that the quaggas not only were there, but had completely covered it in a pretty short time. This is a demo put together by Arizona Game and Fish, showing how quickly these mussels can colonize a place like a pipeline. So I'm going to try to, I have some dialogue boxes that are covering my screen, so I'm just going to try to erase that. But oops. So mussels can completely clog a small diameter pipe. Large pipes, they can't completely clog, but they do cause major operational issues just by covering the walls, sometimes several inches thick. And this reduces the efficiency of pumping the water, so it takes significantly more energy. You'd be surprised at how much more energy it takes to pump water through a biofouled pipeline than just a smooth, clean pipeline. And then, of course, the shells, as the mussels die and shed off, those shells wash down the pipe and get caught downstream in filters or in pumps or wet wells, wherever they can collect downstream. This is a photo of an intake on Parker Dam, also on the Colorado River, showing that in a pretty short time period, they, thickly colonize and can even block the intakes of water systems. Zebra and quagga mussels are both native to Eastern Europe, that area in the green, the Caspian Sea, Black Sea regions. They are present in Western Europe, but considered invasive there, not native to Western Europe. So in that red area, they're present, but considered an invasive species. And as far as their appearance here in the US, they first showed up in the mid to late 80s in Lake St. Clair, which is next to Lake Erie in the Detroit region of Michigan. And this graphic shows, it's from USGS, shows their expansion year by year. Each time you see dots appear, that's the next year where they were found. And this just illustrates how quickly an invasive species can spread into new territory. And just let that run its course. It's now the case that they are in all the major watersheds of the US except for the Pacific Northwest. They still don't have them in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and they are desperately trying to keep them out by doing boat inspections and everything they can to prevent their introduction into the Pacific Northwest. Once they're in a water body, they will attach to virtually any solid surface that's available. You know, could be as little as a Coke can, but they like to attach to boats and propellers. And this is the reason why it's so important to practice good hygiene when you're moving your boat from one water body to another. That's become a major vector for infestation of new lakes, is when somebody goes fishing or takes their boat from one water body and then decides to put it into another water body within a few days. So there's a lot of attention, and rightly so, on campaigns called Clean, Drain, Dry. And those are the steps involved in making sure you're not spreading mussels as you move from one lake to another. They'll also, of course, attach to piers and docks and buoys and chains and anything solid that's in the water. Unfortunately, they also like to colonize live native mollusks, like native mussels, native snails, native clams. And so apparently, the one reason they like it, and I say they like to colonize a certain place, they do have the ability to move around a bit. It looks like, oh, once they attach, that's it. But they can release and go. They can actually kind of crawl, if you will, a little bit. But they like to find native mollusks, probably because those mollusks are themselves filter feeding and pulling in water, and so the native mollusk is kind of drawing a food source towards the quagga and zebra mussels. So they'll attach typically around the opening of the native clam or mussel, and thereby eventually they smother it and just kind of suffocate it. And it's also been found by some researchers that once the cumulative weight of the invasive mussel exceeds the weight of the native mussel itself underneath, then the native mussel just it can't bear the weight. It just gets too exhausted, and it just succumbs to being essentially smothered. And there were researchers who looked at the population of native mussels in the St. Clair and Great Lakes region during the first 5 years that the zebra and quagga mussels, it was first the zebra mussels, were discovered in that region, and they found a dramatic decline in native mussels, and essentially 12 species of native mollusks were essentially wiped out in the first 5 years after zebra mussels were introduced to that Great Lakes region. So you can see that the numbers of individual native mussels just plummeted, and also the number of different species of native mollusks also declined dramatically. So they have a really strong impact on native mollusks. They also have an impact on fish, and that's by essentially smothering also the spawning grounds of the fish, where they lay their eggs, and they just kind of take over the ecosystem. They are voracious feeders, they're filter feeders, and they'll remove the algae from the water by their feeding, and they do have the ability to feed selectively. They'll suck in water to consume the algae in that water, and if it's a cyanobacterial species, a blue-green algae, they'll spit it out. And so they kind of become architects of the ecosystem in a sense. In some cases, consuming the best algae and thereby outcompeting fish and other species, and leaving kind of the less palatable, less desirable algae behind to propagate and fill those ecological niches. So in summary, to this little piece, some of the impacts are enormous costs in terms of economic costs to just protect infrastructure by clogging intakes, for example, drinking water intakes, fouling boats and motors and anything else left in the lake, littering the beaches with their sharp shells. They're very, you can easily slice your hand or your foot. If there's shells on the beach, you pretty much can't walk on the beach anymore without some good protective shoes. And they outcompete the other species present. This is their life cycle. They live about 5 years, 3 or 5 years typically. The adult is the striped one here at kind of 11 o'clock. If you imagine this is a clock, here at 11 o'clock, that's the adult that we're accustomed to seeing. They'll release eggs and sperm. There are, there are males and females. So, some people say it only takes one. Well, not one, it takes two. There's got to be a male and a female, but the females are capable of releasing up to 1 million eggs per season. So, granted, 99.9% of those die, but 0.1% of 1 million is still 1,000. So, one can become easily 1,000, and when you've got 1,000, then you can do the math yourself. They just explode in terms of population, and that is their strategy. Is that particularly the veligers, which are the larvae. They're planktonic, meaning free floating, and they're microscopic. So you don't see them unless you've got, a magnifying glass or a microscope. Most of them, the vast majority of them, don't make it, they die. But the strategy of this species is that there's so many of them that 0.1 or 0.001% do survive. And then over time, those few become many, many. The veligers will float around, as I say, planktonic for about 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then they look for a solid surface to settle on. And at that point, they're still microscopic. You wouldn't really see them with the naked eye. It's just like size of a pinprick. But if you were to run your fingers over the surface of something smooth, you might notice, oh, it feels like sandpaper. Well, that's them beginning to grow. They've settled there and they're beginning to establish. And then you come back a few months later and, oh, here they are. They're filling in as they grow. This is a population curve of veligers. Now, this depends on the location and the climate and everything, but this is just one example. This is from California, showing veliger population. And what it illustrates is that there may be no veligers in the water at some times of year, and then suddenly there are many, many, because there's been a spawning event. And those spawning events can occur anytime the water is greater than about 50 or 52 degrees Fahrenheit. And in most US northern latitudes like your own, there are typically 2 spawning events per year. But if you get down into Arizona or places where it's warm all year, you can have more spawning. You could have spawning events almost all year round. In Arizona, they've measured up to 13 spawning events in a year. As far as what happens over time, and this will address, I did hear kind of ahead of time some of the questions people might have, and there was some mention that, oh, after 9 years or so, they'll just go away on their own. Sorry, that's not the case. I'm not sure where that information came from, but you need to do a little bit more asking around or due diligence on that topic. This is a typical population curve for an invasive species. And it shows that there is an introduction here on the bottom left, and the population may remain very low. And, as I said, most of them die. And most introductions of invasive species actually fail. You can get them and then they die out. And in some of those cases, you may never know that it even occurred because they died out. But if they do take hold, then there's a period where they start to grow and reproduce more quickly. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion from what I've heard, I think that this is where you guys are now at Apple Canyon Lake. Is, you've noticed them a few years ago. Now, a lot of people are noticing them. And it seems like, they're starting to become, almost everywhere we look, there's some. And it's going to just continue to grow and get a lot worse until at some point an invasive species reaches its peak, essentially what we call the carrying capacity of the environment. How much food is available to them? How many solid surfaces are available to them? At some point they max out, and then it will, dip back down and find an equilibrium. Now, how far it dips back down, that will depend on the circumstances. And this curve that I'm showing now is generalized to invasive species. This is actual data from zebra mussels introduced to the Hudson River. The zebra mussels are the red curve, and the blue curve is the native unionid mussels. And you can see that the zebra mussels do go through kind of these boom bust cycles. But if you look at the troughs, the low points in these cycles, what you see is that when they bust, the density is still 500 individuals per square meter. So it's common to find up, to tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of mussels per square meter, which is hard to imagine. But in any case, when you think about a boom and a bust, maybe you think, oh, they're going to decline after some period. Well, yeah, but you've still got 500 per square meter. So, don't hang your hopes on them just going away. So I'm going to talk a little bit about control. And there are different needs in terms of control. And one of the most intense needs is in flowing waters like pipelines and aqueducts. That's because that infrastructure serves a purpose. It's a power plant, or it's a drinking water treatment facility, or it's an irrigation system. Those are, man-made and installed utilities that have someone responsible for maintaining them, an operator, a manager, and they've also got a budget. And they may not have budgeted for zebra mussels last year or this year, but now they know about it, they can budget for it next year. So these are the places, the flowing waters, where people, quickly decide, okay, we've got to do something about this, and we're going to. It's not really a choice, it's a need. In terms of open waters of lakes, it's a bit more complex because there are more actors, more stakeholders. There's homeowners, there's parks, there are regulators, and who has jurisdiction over a lake? It's different for every lake. And who do you have a budget? That's different for every lake. So it's a more complex response and path forward when it's a lake. But I'm going to talk about both, just show you, I know your situation, Apple Canyon, doesn't really involve much in the way of flowing waters. I've been told that nobody is pulling water out of the lake. So, the flowing water situation may not apply directly to you, but nonetheless, photos, pictures tell 1,000 words. So I am going to just show you what it looks like to treat flowing waters. And what we're treating it with is a product called EarthTech QZ, which is an ionic copper. It's made from copper sulfate, but it's not exactly copper sulfate anymore because it's been modified by combining it with a proprietary formulation that's a liquid, it's acidic, and it keeps the copper in the cupric ion form. And this is a patented, it's got a composition of matter patent. So it's unlike any other product, but it's been used for 25 years all across the US in agriculture and in swimming pools and in drinking water. It's been proven to be very effective against algae and bacteria, and then subsequently against zebra and quagga mussels. It's registered in all 50 states of the US for algae control, and it's registered in all the states of the US that have mollusk pests as well. And it is NSF certified to standard 60, which means that it's approved for addition to drinking water. You can use this product right in a drinking water treatment plant, adding it to the water that shortly later will be delivered to homes for drinking. I just kind of told you what is cupric, what does the ionic copper mean? It's the cupric ion that's of copper. It's the Cu++ form of copper. And the reason that's important is that it's more bioavailable. Anytime you add copper sulfate to water or like a lake for algae control, you're hoping that that copper sulfate gets into the cupric ion form because that's the most bioavailable form for the algae and bacteria that you're trying to control. But in practice, much of it does not get into that cupric ion form and is therefore inefficient and may even settle out on the bottom. And there are places where they don't want to use copper sulfate anymore because it was kind of overused and even abused. And then there's been copper accumulating in the sediments and all kinds of problems with that. Well, this EarthTech QZ is an improvement over that. It's a liquid form that is completely soluble. It won't settle out. It stays in the water column until it gets taken up by the algae or bacteria or zebra mussels that you're applying it to treat. So it's a green chemistry that is more efficient and saves time, money, and the environment. So onto the flowing waters. This is an example of an intake of a drinking water treatment utility. This serves Southern California. 20 million people in Los Angeles and San Diego. Half of their water comes from Northern California, and the other half comes from the Colorado River and has to pass through this screen. And in less than a year, the quagga mussels converted this screen into essentially a wall. The gaps in the screen are 3.5 inches. It's intended to keep out bags and sticks and branches and large stuff, but the mussels just attach to it, and then they attach on the backs of each other. And as I say, in less than a year, they can convert a screen into a wall. Now you can remove them mechanically, just like, you know, pick them off one by one, or you can blast them off with power washers. And sometimes that's done in, you know, to protect infrastructure. But then you've still got a disposal problem. What do you do with all those shells? And this is an invasive species. So, you know, even if you take them to the landfill, it has to be a special landfill rated for invasive species. Well, that was the situation in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is one of the first large municipal utilities in the US that decided to use EarthTech QZ. This is the intake for the city of St. Paul, serving about 500,000 people. And the water comes from the Mississippi River and enters into an intake on that white building on the left. And then inside that building, the water has to pass through a series of screens. This is one of the screens, but there are dozens of screens in this structure that the water has to pass through. And at times of mussel reproduction, the screens quickly become fouled and essentially like a wall, like I said. So the workers initially just mechanically or physically knock them off with shovels. and spent a lot of time just cleaning off by hand all these mussels. They would, within the intake structure, there became mounds, piles of dead mussels. And the pipeline itself that led from their source water lake to the water treatment plant was 4.5 miles. And gradually, the mussels don't colonize the entire 4.5 miles at the same time. They seem to start at the beginning of the pipeline, and then with each year, they would just claim a little bit more. The first year is like a few feet, then 100 feet, then 100 yards, then a quarter mile, then a mile. It got to the point where the mussels were infesting a mile of this large pipeline leading to the drinking water treatment plant. And in the foreground, you can see where the workers have removed the mussels using a shovel. And then once they had cleaned it all, there was more than a foot deep of dead and dying zebra mussels in the bottom of the pipe. And then these workers went in with vacuum trucks a vac truck to vacuum out the mussels. But because they're dying and decomposing mussels, it smells horrible and also produces ammonia, which is toxic gas. So they had to use Tyvek suits and respirators to go into this confined space, and it's therefore dangerous and expensive to clean out. And they had to do this every year and fill dumpsters with zebra mussels and cart them off to a special landfill rated for invasive species. So when they learned about EarthTech QZ, they said, bring it on, we want to try that. This is their intake and the tank next to their intake where we stored the EarthTech QZ. And this is the pump that we use, just a little metering pump, pretty inexpensive, and just polyethylene tubing to deliver EarthTech QZ to the intake of that building. And this is the first day when they inspected the screens. And these are the 3 or 4 guys who had, until then, in the previous years, not been able to do their regular jobs because they spent all summer just cleaning screens. They would clean all the screens at one location and then go to another location. They had several locations like this. And they would just, by the time they got to the last screen at the last location, it was already time to go back and clean the first screen at the first location. And so, they had other jobs, but they couldn't do them because they were doing this cleaning nonsense. So this was the first day they saw the results of feeding EarthTech QZ, and they were delighted. There's, no zebra mussels on the screens at all. They also looked inside the intake building, and the one place where the mussels were able to colonize was on the feed line itself, which is this little tube, the white tube next to the glove in the center. That's where we were feeding EarthTech QZ in the middle of this. This is a gate that lets the water in. Well, they closed the gate to dewater the pipe and inspect. And the one place where mussels colonized was on the feed line itself. Apparently there was like a little eddy that formed where product was not well mixed. So you can see that where there was no product well mixed, the zebra mussels colonized very heavily, but everywhere else where there was some small amount of EarthTech QZ, they did not colonize. They also dewatered the whole pipeline just to inspect it, and it was completely clean. You can see on the left the previous year, and on the right the year they started using EarthTech QZ. Down at the water treatment plant, they were, of course, interested to know how much copper would be left in the water when it got to the treatment plant 4.5 miles down the pipe. And so they were sampling there, and these are the results, weekly results of their sampling. And you can see the numbers were typically 0 parts per billion copper remaining, sometimes 1, 2, 3, or 4 parts per billion copper remaining. That's after having fed 60 parts per billion up at the intake. So the vast majority of the copper was consumed in the course of travel from the intake to the water treatment plant. And incidentally, these concentrations of copper are close to what you would find as background concentrations of copper, in a lot of water bodies. It'd be interesting to test your own Apple Canyon Lake. There's probably 1 part per billion copper there. just because there's copper in the soil. Plants need copper. It's the 26th most abundant element in the on the periodic chart. So copper is out there, and it's actually an essential micronutrient. So to the point of, if we treated it at 60 parts per billion, and then it went down to 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 0 parts per billion, where did it go? Well, it got taken up by the algae, the bacteria, the zebra mussels that were in that pipeline. Copper is needed for all life on Earth. And this article describes the role of copper in biology. On the right here, of course, you can't read that small lettering, but this is a list that continues on to the whole next page of some of the enzymes and metabolic functions for which copper is essential. And they include photosynthesis, respiration, electron transport, ATP synthesis, membrane transport. These are the things that require a small amount of copper. So that's the reason that the copper gets taken up and essentially goes away, if you will. And humans, we are particularly good at regulating. If we get too much copper, we just excrete it. But most people don't get too much copper. In fact, some people don't get enough copper. So if you look at your multivitamins, a lot of, not all of them, but many multivitamins will have some copper in there. And if you look at the side of your cereal box that you're feeding to your children, it'll show, how much copper is in the cereal. So some people are sort of freaked out by, oh, copper, isn't that a heavy metal? And well, iron's a metal too. And, it's essential, just as copper is. So it's all about, in chemistry, it's all about the concentration. And what we're doing with EarthTech QZ is just using a very small concentration, but we're lucky in that the mussels are very sensitive, more so than we are, and more so than other organisms in the environment. The mussels are very sensitive to copper. That's why we use it to control them. How much do you need? Well, like everything in toxicology, it's all about the dose. If you feed a higher concentration, then they'll die more quickly. And that's what you see with the red line here. A little bit higher dose, 2 parts per million as product, as EarthTech QZ, which is equivalent to 120 parts per billion as copper. That will kill 100% of the mussels in about 5 or 6 days. If you want to use a little bit lower dose, like 1 part per million as product, it will kill 100% of the mussels in about 10 or 12 days. Now, note that some of them will start to die in 1 day, but like any population, there are weak individuals and there are tougher individuals. And so to get to 100%, it takes longer. It's harder to kill that toughest one than it is to kill the weakest one. And if you want to go with a very low concentrations, like 0.5 part per million as product, that's only 30 parts per billion as copper, then it may take 25 or 30 days to get to 100% mortality, but you do still get there. And this has been our approach, as I've talked about before, the green chemistry, and, we don't want to add more chemical to the environment than we need to. So our approach has been to carve out this niche, and we've really been at the vanguard of this approach for mussel control, a low dose for a longer period, as opposed to a high dose and kill them all quickly, where you might see some impacts from using a high dose. Maybe you'd kill some fish or something, there'd be side effects. We instead use a low dose, and we're more patient to get to 100% mortality of the mussels, but that way we don't kill any fish or other non-targets. As far as, I kind of mentioned this already, but if you have concerns about copper in drinking water, there is something called the lead and copper rule that governs the concentrations of lead and copper in drinking water. And the limit for copper in drinking water at your home, when you turn on the tap in your kitchen or your bathroom, the limit there is 1.3 milligrams per liter as copper. That's the same as saying 1,300 parts per billion as copper. So that's what the EPA has decided is safe for drinking water. Well, what we're doing is treating down in this range, where the green line is or the purple line. And then by the time, that's at the moment we put it into the water, it immediately starts to be consumed. By the time it makes it to the water treatment plant, you're probably down around this blue line. And then the water treatment plant takes out most of the rest. And by the time it leaves the water treatment plant, it's down here in the weeds where you can't even really see it. So just to make sure people understand the doses that we're talking about, we're way below what the EPA has determined is safe for people to drink every day. And EarthTech QZ is registered with the EPA as a pesticide. All pesticides are supposed to be registered with the EPA. In practice, some are not. That's of course illegal, but it does happen. But this is just to tell you, we have gone through all the hoops and hurdles to do this registration. And the reason is that it details the dose rates, what's safe for the environment and for people, and how to handle the container afterwards, and when to dose, when to stop dosing, all those details, how to dose, those are involved in getting registered. And this is a partial list of drinking water treatment plants and other utilities that are currently using EarthTech QZ to protect their pipelines. So you can see we've got a variety, short pipes, long pipes, large volumes, 100 million gallons a day for the city of Tulsa. And then we've got very small systems as well, short pipes and small systems. So across the entire range from small to large, we've done it. As I mentioned earlier, this same product is also used in swimming pools. It's under another brand name called Pristine Blue, but people are using this exact same chemistry, exact same product in their hot tubs and in their swimming pools to prevent algae and bacteria in those environments. So once again, it's approved. You can go swimming. If we were to treat Apple Canyon Lake with EarthTech QZ to control zebra mussels, people could be swimming in the lake the same afternoon. It's no problem. In fact, we'll be way below the dose that's used in swimming pools. We would be way below that for treating for mussels. It's also the same exact product, has another brand name that's used in agriculture. So it's being applied even to food crops as well. And yeah, just a little time check. I know there's a lot here, and I should probably try to speed up a little bit, but this gives you a little background. And this particular graph shows the distinction between EarthTech's formulation of copper and the conventional copper sulfate pentahydrate, which is the blue line. And this was a bioassay run by a third-party firm, not our own data, but from an ecotoxicology lab in California, measuring algal inhibition with copper. And what they found was you need to apply 3 times as much. If you look, for example, the percent algal inhibition achieved by copper sulfate pentahydrate, the blue line, if you look for example, at 25% inhibition of algae, it takes 0.36 as copper delivered as copper sulfate pentahydrate versus 0.12 if you deliver the copper as EarthTech or EarthTech QZ. So it's just to show, again, the green chemistry and kind of our value proposition. What's special about this product is that it's formulated in a way that you don't have to use as much copper. And that was with algae. This is similar data showing the same thing with mussels, zebra and quagga mussels. If you look at the blue bars, the zebra mussels, you can see that even when applied all at the same concentration of 0.5 milligrams per liter copper equivalent, only EarthTech QZ was able to get to 100% mortality whereas the other 3 products are down here around 25 to 35% mortality at the same concentration of copper. So that's why you can get away with applying lower doses of copper if you deliver it as Earth Tech than if you were to use copper sulfate, conventional copper sulfate or other formulations. Okay, now we're going to dive into some of the lake applications. And this was one of the first ones it happened in Minnesota. Lake Minnewaska is outside Minneapolis, and they discovered mussels in a bay of Lake Minnewaska. It was a 29-acre bay off of a larger 400 or 300-acre lake. And so they did what we call rapid response. They quickly treated the bay in hopes of preventing spread of the mussels to the 300 acres of the rest of the lake. And so the blue line shows the copper concentration. They targeted a dose of 0.4 milligrams per liter as copper. And then they were tracking mussel mortality in the orange line. And you can see that they had 0 mussel mortality up until 4 days. And then, 6 days, 7 days, by the time they got to 10 days, they got 100% mortality at that site. And what happened to the copper? After they got to 100% mortality, they thought, okay, now we can stop treating. And when they stopped treating, then in the subsequent week, the copper concentration drifted back down to, less than 0.1 milligram per liter. So eventually, in a matter of a week, couple weeks, the copper concentration was back to pre-treatment levels. That was a case study from Minnesota. This is one I'll share from Pennsylvania. And this is a full lake eradication. And we are the ones who have pioneered the techniques of full lake eradications. This is at a lake called Billmeyer Quarry. It used to be a quarry, then it was kind of abandoned, filled with water. And it's about 30 acres. And our treatment period was about 40 days. And that corresponds to what, as I said, kind of a patient, low dose, but for a long time, so 40 days. The project cost in this case was a little over $100,000. Half of that was in the cost of the Earth Tech QZ. And as far as the outcome, this is kind of an old slide. So initially we had to say we were cautiously optimistic that we had achieved 100% eradication. That's because we couldn't find any, but it's kind of impossible to prove the absence of something. But we didn't think it was there. Well, now 4 years have gone by and there's still no mussels. So I would ratchet this up. We're confident this is a full 100% eradication. Here's where it is, Billmeyer Quarry in southern Pennsylvania. A little more background on the product. As I said, it's about a 30-acre lake. This one is interesting for you all because it's a deep lake. This lake is over 100 feet deep. As I understand, Apple Canyon Lake is 70 or 80 feet deep at the deepest. So this is relevant to your case in that this is even deeper, and we were able to achieve eradication. And this was incidentally a management decision to treat this lake. It was not a research project, but we did our best to collect data and document both the efficacy and also the impacts on non-target organisms, which in this lake included bluegill fish, largemouth and smallmouth bass, channel catfish, gizzard shad, and some bullhead. So this lake was full of fish, and a lot of fish. When you went out in the boat, you'd look down and see 20 good-sized fish. So lots of fish in this lake, and we did not kill the fish by treating to eradicate for mussels. This is the Billmeyer Quarry from above. It's adjacent to the Susquehanna River. And the whole reason for wanting to eradicate was because the managers of this quarry lake intended to pump some water from the quarry into the Susquehanna River to supplement flows in the river during drought periods. And they didn't want to spread quagga mussels from the quarry to the Susquehanna River. So, that was the reason for asking someone to come treat. They put out an RFP, request for proposals. We gave them an RFP with the costs and everything, and we won the RFP and executed the project. We treated the 50% of the surface area that was the shoreline, and we targeted that 50% with a 0.4 milligrams per liter dose, which was equivalent to a 0.2 milligrams per liter dose as copper on the basis of the entire lake's volume. And we collected mussels, fabricated some cages, and then positioned those cages with 20 mussels per cage at different locations and depths throughout the lake, about 50 cages at different locations and depths, so that we could monitor mortality. We look at the mussels in the cages as a way to estimate mortality of all the rest of the mussels out in the lake. And these were the results. We had cages placed around the periphery of the lake where we treated, and we also had cages placed in the center of the lake where we didn't treat, but the product is very soluble and it mixes very well, and it just on its own, without any need to do mechanical mixing, it just dispersed to the center as well. So it took a little longer to get to 100% mortality in the lake center where we didn't treat, but we did get to 100% mortality everywhere in the lake. Subsequently, they decided to pump down the quarry lake, just as they had intended. They pumped into the Susquehanna River, and that allowed them to inspect the shoreline where they saw, thousands and millions of dead mussels. There were no live mussels. Everything had been killed before they pumped out. You can see a truck and other items down in the lake. Those were there as dive features. There was a scuba diving school here, and those were just items of interest for people to see when they were scuba diving. A quick summary of the treatment concentrations and costs. As I said, we targeted 0.2 milligrams per liter as copper on the basis of the whole lake, and we treated 3 times. And if you add up the 3 treatments, the full amount of copper applied came to 0.44 milligrams per liter as copper. Now, this was a bit surprising and very pleasing to everybody involved, because we had anticipated that it might take quite a bit more, like 1 milligram per liter copper, but we didn't even require 0.5 milligram per liter as copper. Now, the EPA label allows you to treat at 1 milligram per liter copper each time that you treat, but we didn't even have to use the full labeled rate. Even when we treated 3 times and added them all together, we didn't even come to half of what the EPA allows you to do in one single treatment. So we were very happy with, again, kind of the green chemistry, and we just didn't have to add much chemical to achieve the result. We have monitored subsequent to the treatment. It's been 4 years, as I said, and we've checked the DNA, something called eDNA, is environmental DNA. We've also done plankton toes to look for veligers, and there have been no mussels found in the lake in the 4 years since treatment. So we're confident that it was a complete and successful eradication. As far as other organisms in the lake, we've also looked at those and found that, of course, I think there was a hit. They took a hit during treatment, but the zooplankton in the lake bounces right back within a few weeks. And these are samples. We don't have time to go into too much detail, but we collected samples at 1 year and at 2 years post-treatment, and there were lots of different, great diversity and numbers of different non-target organisms, especially cladocerans, which are like Daphnia and Cereodaphnia, copepods, ostracods, and also other larger organisms that are higher on the food chain. So it was really a robust and diverse food web that was still intact, even following this eradication of the quagga mussels. And to that point, okay, so that was a third-party environmental consultant just looking at one of the samples 1 year post-treatment, just to observe what does it look like is going on in this lake, a year after we eradicated quagga mussels. Well, it made very clear it's not like we nuked the lake. That was what a lot of people thought would happen later. They think, what? You used copper to eradicate? What? You don't care about the fish? You're just going to kill all the fish? No, not at all. That's not the case at all. We didn't kill all the fish. They're still there. And we didn't kill all the zooplankton either. As I say, I'm sure they took a hit during the couple weeks of treatment, but they bounced right back. These are some of the numbers involved in the sampling. And it's just to show, these are the number of individuals in a 5 to 10 meter tow. And then you divide by the number of liters to get, the individuals per liter. But the number of individuals in the tow, in the plankton tow itself, we're talking, tens of thousands of individuals in just a short, plankton tow. So lots of, it was a very green and healthy lake. We also were pleased to find some clam veligers as distinct from mussel veligers. So, there were other mollusks that survived this treatment, native clams. And we've done with USGS in Minnesota, we've continued to do more research using low doses of EarthTech QZ. We've seen that even native mussels survive where zebra mussels do not. So that was unexpected, but we're very pleased that seems to be the case. This project in Pennsylvania is all written up and published in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm happy to provide this if anyone's interested. We are also being used in fish hatcheries. This is a fish hatchery in Oklahoma City. And we don't have time to go into detail, but these are fish ponds where they care most about the health of the fish. And they're using EarthTech QZ to decontaminate their fish ponds of zebra mussels because their source water has zebra mussels in them. And they don't want to be a vector. Fish hatchery raises fish and then sends them out for stocking into lakes. Well, they don't want to be stocking mussel veligers along with their fish. So they use our product to decontaminate their water of mussel veligers. And again, it's right in the presence of fish, even including, and this is just to show they get good algae control as well from using EarthTech QZ to decontaminate for mussels. They pick up as a side benefit algae control. These two pictures are not, a week apart. It's a different time of year, but it does show just, what a clean. It's easier to harvest, and they get better yields from an algae-free pond than algae, choked pond. And we're even being used in fish hatcheries that are of the most sensitive fish. Not all fish are equivalent. Salmonids like rainbow trout and steelhead are among the most sensitive to copper. They're more susceptible to copper than game fish like bass and walleye. And but even rainbow trout seem to be able to tolerate doses of EarthTech QZ that are effective at controlling invasive mollusks. This is a case study from closer to home for you guys. This is down in the Chicago area, a lake called the Valley Low. It's a golf club called the Valley Low Club. And the golf club is here on the north and west side. And then on the other side of the lake, there are about 30 homes. So it's shared jurisdiction between private homes and a golf club. And they discovered mussels, I think it was in 2019. And so they know that they were there at least since 2018, but quickly they were virtually everywhere. This is what the golf club looks like, and then a view of the homes. In the summertime, they have summer camps with lots of kids playing, swimming, boating. You can see there's a slide. Well, now all these areas around the slide and where the boats are, and even along the beach here, there's rocks. They're all now covered with zebra mussels. So it's a liability for the kids who, you know, are boating and swimming and walking and all. You can see these rocks are all covered with zebra mussels that can cut their feet and their hands or whatever brushes up against them. So the Valley Low Club contacted us and asked for a proposal to eradicate mussels from their lake. And these are some of the conditions of the lake. We look at the chemistry of the water, and we found when we were examining that this lake also had native unionid mussels, like this large unionid that had been fully colonized and eventually killed by the zebra mussels that had infested the lake. And there were many, many examples of unionids like this one that are now dead because the zebra mussels had just smothered them. So we came up with a dosing plan, and the original plan, I had to be kind of conservative in terms of budgeting how much product to use. And I initially thought, well, we might need as much as 0.84 milligrams per liter as copper. Again, the EPA allows you in even a single dose, you can use up to 1 milligram per liter as copper. But I thought, well, we'll maybe use 3 doses, and maybe together those 3 doses will be a sum of 0.84 milligrams per liter as copper. And then at the last minute, we decided, let's spread it out even more. Instead of 3 doses, let's do 4 doses. And that way be more careful not to kill any fish, because there are a lot of fish in this lake. And so in the end, we decided to dose 4 times, and the first dose was just this 0.24. Well, turned out that we didn't need 4 doses. We applied the 0.24, and then we were done. We checked mortality of the mussels after applying this first dose and found that, wow, they're already all dying. So we never did apply the second, third, or fourth dose. And the total amount of product required for eradicating zebra mussels from this entire lake was only 550 gallons. That's the amount that is equivalent to this 0.24 as milligrams per liter as copper. It was applied by a local applicator, McLeod Aquatics, and you do need a license to apply a pesticide into a lake. So that's what the lake applicator offers. These are the cages that we used to monitor mortality. We fabricated those cages ourselves. And we put 20 mussels into each cage and then positioned those cages at different locations and depths around the lake so that we could monitor that we're getting good coverage. We're getting good mortality everywhere and at all depths. And the mortality showed that by just 1 week, we were 100% mortality of mussels at the surface and 80% mortality of mussels at the bottom. And then by, actually that was after just 3 days. By the time we got to 1 week, we were, still 100% mortality of mussels at the surface. And I think it was 99 or 98% mortality of mussels at the surface. And by the time we waited another few days, at 10 days, we were 100% of mortality of mussels at the bottom as well. So we continued to look around the lake and try to find, that mortality I just showed you was of mussels in the cages. And we think those are representative of mussels throughout the lake. But of course, we went and looked throughout the lake as well, and we could not find a single live mussel. Here's what the dead mussels looked like. They were gaping and open, and their flesh was actually even gone. We measured the residual copper in the treated water. We had targeted about 0.2, well, as I said, 0.24 milligrams per liter copper was the dose. And this shows the copper residual. The red line is at the bottom, lake bottom, and the blue line is the copper residual being measured at the lake surface. And after we got to 100% mortality, we no longer measured copper residual at the bottom because it's more difficult to get a sample from the bottom. You need to use a special device called a Van Dorn bottle. It's just more time consuming and difficult. But by this time we saw that, the product mixes very well. The concentration at the bottom was almost the same as the concentration at the top. And then we continued to monitor the concentration at the top. And by about 2 months after treatment, the copper had been completely consumed and gotten back to background levels. Once again, pulling up bricks or rocks or things that we could find on the bottom, we couldn't find a single live mussel anywhere. That goes for chains and hoses and ropes and other things hanging in the water that had previously been colonized by the mussels. And there was a event during our treatment event. There were about 35 dead fish, carp, found, but it's a little bit fuzzy as to whether that was directly from our treatment, because they had a fish die off of a larger one, a couple hundred. Carp had died earlier in the year in April from a disease that seems to be going around called VHS. And so probably these fish, the 35 fish died from a combination of the VHS and then, the additional stress of the copper treatment. But it's worth mentioning these carp are not really desirable. In other lakes, they actually, will offer you money to remove the carp. There's kind of a trash fit, they're actually quite large and but they're not edible, and they're not really a desirable species. So, and in any case, we didn't kill them all. The managers estimate that there's well over 1,000 carp still out in that lake. So if we were to treat Apple Canyon Lake with EarthTech QZ to eradicate mussels, I can't guarantee there wouldn't be some dead fish. There, very well could be, but it wouldn't be like a huge fish kill. And believe me, we don't want a fish kill. That looks bad for us, right? That's kind of the worst optics. Is it if it looks like, oh, to use this product, you have to be willing to kill all your fish. That's the last thing we want. And I would predict that, there might be a couple dead fish, but as I understand it, Apple Canyon Lake gets restocked every year. So it really is not that big a deal. These are some of the folks who helped us with the project. We have kind of a citizen scientist operation going here, particularly this guy, John Sonnenberg, with the guy with the zebra mussel hunter t-shirt. He's been very instrumental, a great guy. He's organized high school students, college students as interns, and everybody's working on this, collecting data, doing plankton tows. And so it's been an educational experience as well as a beneficial management treatment project for the facility. Just to mention about the non-target organisms and the effect on zebra mussel veligers, the planktonic form, you can see that prior to the treatment occurred on July 26th of this past year. Prior to treatment on July 16th, we did a plankton tow and found 436 zebra mussel veligers per liter. So, they were very high concentration of mussels in the water. prior to treatment. The morning of treatment, it had declined just by natural, it's not always the same every day. So they had come down a bit, but still the dominant species, 126 velligers per liter. This was the morning of treatment. And then by about a week later, that 126 was down to 6.5 per liter. And then a few weeks later, which was the next time we checked, it was down to 0 velligers per liter. So it's a lot more difficult to monitor for velligers just because it requires microscope work and it's tedious, and you pull a sample, then you have to concentrate the sample in order to see what's there. So it's not as easy, that's why we don't have like daily samples. But this was enough for us to see that, okay, we controlled the velligers as well. This shows in the context, the velligers in the context of everything else. Zebra mussels here are at the bottom, but you can see as compared to all the other organisms, naturally occurring zooplankton in the water, the zebra mussels were by far the dominant species. They were, 2 orders of magnitude more than most of the other things. They had come to just take over the system. And during treatment, you can see, as I described in the Pennsylvania project, during treatment, there was a decline in everything, not just the zebra. I mean, we got the zebra mussels to 0. Well, these other organisms, they took a hit during treatment, and some of them seemed to be absent, completely absent. But by a month and a half after treatment, a little bit less than 2 months after treatment, those other non-target zooplankton, they came roaring back to numbers far exceeding the numbers pre-treatment. So, you can see that the zebra mussels were controlling and, inhibiting all the naturally occurring zooplankton prior to treatment. Once we removed the zebra mussels, it gave all the other critters an opportunity to come back and, enjoy life as it was before. This shows that same information just in graphic form. Some people like tables, other people like pictures. The crosses here, the X's are the zebra mussels. So you can see they were very high as compared to everything else. They dominated the system, and then they became 0, and it gave an opportunity for the other things to pop back up. And this is that same data just without the zebra mussels. So you can see prior to treatment, the zooplankton were down in this range of 0 to 40 individuals per liter, and once the zebra mussels were removed, they were able to propagate. In the meantime, during that lull, when I said everything else was taking a hit, that's what this picture shows. Now, things took a hit, but it doesn't mean that there was no life at all. It just went through a shift. This is showing that these were smaller organisms that were difficult for even our experts to identify because they were so small. It's something we call nanoplankton, a type of zooplankton that's so small it's called nanoplankton. And it's, bacteria and algae. It's not to say that there was no life at all. It was just that this ecosystem was going through a major shift. The zebra mussels had taken over the ecosystem. Then all of a sudden we're removing the zebra mussels. So the ecosystem is, juggling who's going to win out now. Now that big player is no longer the big player, what's going to happen? Well, there was this period where it was dominated by nanoplankton. And this is another photo of nanoplankton, including heterotrophic bacteria and microalgae like chlorella and nanochloropsis. And then, the other organisms could come back. This is now showing the copper residual concentration in the context of the whole project. So this is kind of a summary of what happened at Valley Low Lake. We treated on July 26th. That shows the copper concentration. Then by this point, August 5th, we had reached 100% mortality of zebra mussels. And then during this period shown here was the time when the ecosystem was dominated by the nanoplankton. And then by September, late September, the zooplankton had its big rebound, and you can see the copper concentration was just drifting down. So in summary, for this Valley Low project, we believe the zebra mussels have been eradicated from the lake. Once again, it's hard to prove the absence of something, but we'll continue to do sampling in the future to confirm what we believe. And the dose rate was this 0.24 milligrams per liter. That's only 4 parts per million as product, EarthTech QZ. We got to 100% mortality of adult mussels in the cages in just 10 days. It was much less product than we had initially budgeted. And so we were pleased about that. And we believe that that could be in part due to the fact that the water was very warm. And I know there'll be questions about when is the best time to treat, and all other things being equal, warmer water is better just because it speeds everything up. The metabolism of the mussels is running faster, so they'll take up the copper more quickly. And we think that the very warm water here in Valley Low helped just kill the mussels faster. So going back to this population curve for invasive species, my personal opinion is that you guys are about here on that curve, but the densities of mussels can reach hundreds of thousands. And I just Googled this morning, zebra mussel population density, and this is what the Fish and Wildlife Service result was, up to 700,000 individuals per square meter. Well, real data from this one particular place on the Hudson River shows that, even if you go through the boom bust, you're down at 500 individuals per meter, or maybe you get to, near zero, but then the next year they became higher than ever. So, if you're thinking that, well, we can just wait this out and they'll eventually go away, sorry to say, that's not going to happen. And I believe, I'm almost done here, just a couple more slides. I believe that it is a responsibility now that you have mussels there for you to clean your boats leaving the lake. You're going to want to connect with somebody. This is not ours. I'm just sharing with you for example, this company CD3 offers, they sell equipment used essentially as a cleaning station. And you don't want Apple Canyon to be the source of, or the vector for infesting other lakes in your region. So you've now got kind of a responsibility to clean your boat as you pull it out. And sorry to say that if that cleaning procedure in the past has cost $300 per boat to pull it out and clean it and store it, that's not going to be $300 anymore. It's going to be substantially higher, because you're going to have to power wash or hand scrape or whatever it is to clean off the boat. And just as you would hope that other people would do this before bringing their boat to your lake. Now, I do believe that you have an opportunity to eradicate, and we can get into what that would look like, the costs and everything. I'm going to just share one more example, because I think you've probably heard about it. That's Highland Lake. It's near Valley Low Lake in the Chicago area, and this is where John Sonnenberg lives, the guy with the zebra mussel hunter T-shirt. Now, he and the people at this Highland Lake, it's about a 100-acre lake, they have elected to, instead of attempt an eradication, they are just treating the shoreline to protect their docks and buoys and boats. And so that's a little bit experimental. They're not wiping out the mussels entirely, but they are getting, very reduced presence. This shows 2019 before they treated. They were monitoring using these devices, monitoring devices, settlement plates. And you can see that the mussels colonize the plates, and then they weigh the plates. And then the next year, after they had treated just the shoreline, the plates were much cleaner. So, you get some control, but there are still mussels there. So, that is an option if you just wanted to treat a marina or you just wanted to treat around a dock. You can get some control, but, you're going to be kind of locked into then if you want to continue that, you're going to have to treat every year and perhaps repeatedly, more than once a year even. So that is pretty much it for my presentation. Thank you for your patience. I know it's been long, but a lot of information, and I'm ready now to take questions. And particularly, I imagine there'll be questions about, well, what would it look like to treat Apple Canyon Lake? And I can offer you, some rough estimates as to what that might look like. But I'm going to open it up for a second. And these are some of the questions that I had heard from before and kind of anticipated. But let's give someone else a chance to chime in.
Yeah,
Hey,
George Strogas here.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, George.
Question I have, are the zebra mussels in the rivers and streams that feed Apple Canyon Lake? Because at the end of each bay, we have streams feeding into the lake, and we have Hell's Branch at the north end feeding into the lake. Are the zebra mussels in these streams and creeks and that?
I doubt it. I can't say for sure without, somebody going and looking in those streams and creeks,
Okay.
but it's much more likely that they came from a boat that was brought, they came from another lake.
Yeah, that's our biggest problem here.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree. That is your biggest challenge. You're going to want to have a procedure put in place for people to decontaminate their boats,
Yes,
leaving and arriving at your lake. And, it's a hassle.
yes, it is.
It's an expense. It's not
Yes.
what you wanted, but unfortunately, that's where you're at.
Okay, next question I have. If we kill the zebra mussels with your copper compound, will we have to clean up the dead zebra mussel shells?
No.
Okay,
I mean,
we dredge the lake and the bays. Will that get rid of them? And if they end up in our dredge pit, will there be a problem? Because you had talked about taking the dead zebra mussels and hauling them off to a whatever landfill.
right. Well, is the dredge pit dry or is it,
It's wet.
how wet? Like very wet or
Yeah,
Like,
very
is it-
water standing.
standing water?
Right.
Well, it's possible they could survive in there, I suppose, but I wouldn't think for very long. It's probably not. There's probably not a lot of food for them in there.
Okay.
But yeah, the mussels that are already in the lake. I mean, what I tell people, if you've got a pipeline or some sort of system that's contaminated, you may have one cleanup job to, when you kill them, you might have to clean them up once. But, once you kill them all, then you don't have to clean them up again. If
Okay.
you don't kill them all, then you're going to have to be cleaning them off every year or multiple times per year. So yeah, there might be one cleanup for certain places once, but then they should be gone. And the mussel shells will eventually decompose, and over time they're not as sharp, and they kind of get worn down and just decompose.
One last question, and it just came to mind talking about these. We irrigate our golf course with lake water. What are the ramifications of that system being overrun by the zebra mussels?
It is likely that irrigation system will become clogged with zebra mussels.
Okay.
If you didn't try to eradicate from Apple Canyon Lake, you would at least want to institute some sort of treatment at the intake of that system to prevent, because the zebra mussel veligers are microscopic. They'd be sucked into that pipeline and into the irrigation system, and then they'll settle out somewhere in that pipe or in the sprinklers themselves, and
Yes.
then they'll start to grow, and you'll have a clogged pipe. And if you've got ponds or lakes at that golf course that are fed with the same water and maintained with that same, then you'll have zebra mussels in those ponds and lakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you, George.
Excellent. Any other folks on the phone? There's a number of questions in chat that I want to make sure we get to, but I saw a few people come off of mute. So I'll pause for a second.
Bob Beasing, 1A37 Pioneer. Just curious if if we do this treatment and eradicate the zebra mussels from the lake, what is to stop them from coming back when someone brings a boat in from an infected area somewhere else?
The thing that is to stop them from coming back when someone brings a boat from another infected lake is your future procedure for cleaning and decontaminating boats entering your lake. I mean, you're absolutely right. They could be reintroduced the next year if you allow that to happen. So, you know, I don't envy you with that, you know, chore now, but that's the reality of invasive species, is that you've got to try to keep them out. And historically, people have believed there's nothing you can do about zebra mussels. You know, everyone just tries to keep them out, because once you get them, you know, you're done. There's nothing, you know, the word on the street has been, there's nothing you can do. There's no way to get rid of them. Well, we have shown that there is a way to get rid of them, and we've done it, and we continue to do it. And, you know, I showed you some smaller lakes. We're planning a lake this coming summer that's 900 acres in Texas. And we've got other lakes in Idaho, or I'm not Idaho, in Indiana and in the Chicago area that are also, and one in New York that's about 400 acres. And so, you know, we have shown that you can get rid of them. Now, that just puts you to where you were, you know, 8 years ago before you had them. You still would need to do something to keep them out. And, you know, that's up to you. If you want to say, well, we throw in the towel, we're going to just live with them. That is a choice, but I'm here to tell you it's going to be costly, because every individual, the cost is going to be spread out. Everybody's going to have to clean their own boat, clean their own dock, you know, nurse their own cut fingers and toes. You know, there are costs to doing nothing and just letting these run rampant. There's costs to eradicating, but at least then you've got the benefit of they're not bothering you.
Great question, Mr. Busing. Sorry, yes, someone else come off of mute.
Yes, Henry. Hi, Steve, Sean. Our bays have different levels of infestation. Some bays are highly infested and other bays show almost no infestation. Would it be possible to treat those bays separately, or does everything have to be treated at the same rate?
You can customize the treatment to, you know, just as you're saying, more, and that's what I would do. Even if I was pursuing a full lake eradication, I would treat more heavily in the areas where I know they're present and heavy, and you know, concentrate the treatment there because I know they're there. But and you could, if you wanted to, you could just treat those bays and not pursue a full lake eradication, but that would be, again, you know, temporary. Eradication is 100%, and, you know, you'd be looking to remove them from the entire lake. Well, there's kind of a continuum of options in between. You could treat only in the places where you know they are, that is an option. And as I say, even if we were to pursue a strategy of 100% full lake eradication, I would weight the treatment toward, more heavily dose in the areas where we know they're present, and also in the areas that are of highest value to you, like the beaches, like this jumping rock I've been told about, like the marina. Those are, the marina is likely where they're going to be heaviest anyway, because that's probably where they came in. Somebody brought their boat in through a boat ramp or a marina, and that's probably where they started, and where we would focus treatment if you decide to do that.
Another question: has anybody came up with the idea of having something that, say, a person could pull their boat through on the trailer, and it would have a lot of the Urtec QZ in it, and therefore kill all the mussels before you launch the boat?
We don't have that. As I described, our strategy is more of a low dose for a long time. As you saw, we're not killing them in minutes or hours. We're taking days and weeks. So that's kind of our niche, our approach. If you wanted to do what you're describing, I would recommend a different product. And actually, for my money, the best product for what you're talking about is simply hot water. You can kill zebra mussels in less than a minute with hot water. And when I say hot, I mean, 120 degrees or something, it's pretty hot. But, that would be a very good decontamination procedure, is just use hot water.
A hot water pressure washer then could possibly do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Paula Weiner. I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. And the biggest question that probably needs to be answered quickly is, what's your approximate cost for full eradication on a 400-acre lake?
Yeah, I anticipated that question, and happy to address it. I just would ask that you understand that I only just heard about this recently, and we don't have very much information. I'd want to do more digging into it, but I feel confident that this could be done for, well, certainly less than $1 million. I would, my best estimate is that the chemical cost alone would be less, kind of not to exceed $500,000. There'd be like about $100,000 in terms of kind of consulting and putting together the protocol and sort of our expertise in how to do it, and monitoring the efficacy of the treatment, to show like that it was complete, it was successful, and documenting that, and then another 100,000 or so for the actual lake applicator, the person who puts the product in the water. So that's 500K, for the chemical, another 100K for the consulting and sort of the treatment method, and then 100K for the application event itself. So that's 700K. That's my, I'm going to just throw that out there so that you guys have something to think about, an order of magnitude estimate. Now, like Valley Low Lake, we ended up using only a quarter or a third of the product that I budgeted. And, that could happen here too. So maybe the 500K that I told you would really turn out to be 150 or 200, but I don't want to commit to that because, we'd have to see. So that's the context for which, but I do believe those numbers are real, that it's possible we could achieve eradication for $200,000 in chemical. You'd still have the 100 for the consulting and the treatment protocol and the, how to do it. And you'd still have, 50 or so for the, the lake applicator maybe wouldn't charge you the full 100 because they didn't have to apply the whole, projected amount. So those costs would come down a little bit. But that gives you an idea. We're looking at, $400,000 to $700,000 all in. That's my guesstimate.
And just quickly, one more question. Because we have a constant in and outflow of water from our lake, is that going to affect the efficacy of the treatment?
That's the sort of detail I'd like to hear more about. I don't see that as being a deal breaker of any sort. The lakes that we treated, like that one in Pennsylvania, it also has influx of water. So, we would account for that and sort of want to know where it is and what volumes, what flows, that would just inform our approach and, how we put together the treatment plan, but it's not like a deal breaker of any sort.
Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I'm going to use my patient time to see if anyone else comes off of mute. But going through some of those questions that are in the chat, Dr. Hammond, one of those that you kind of touched on, it had to do with non-target impacts of some fish species. I think you had mentioned salmonids are highly or potentially susceptible to the copper. One of the a study that came out of the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Research Species Center looked at Lake Minnetonka and specifically Robinson Bay and St. Albans Bay, and it mentioned that fathead minnows looked like they were particularly susceptible to the copper products as well. Knowing that fathead minnows are in Apple Canyon Lake, is that something, is there more information about what that potential impact was or could be, or what types of questions should we be asking, to make sure we're fully informed when making this decision about the bait fish that are not stocked yearly at Apple Canyon?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. And I'm glad you found that study by USGS about Lake Minnetonka involving Robinson Bay, which was their control bay. They didn't treat Robinson Bay. And then they compared what happened or what they observed in Robinson Bay with what they could see in St. Albans Bay, where they did treat. St. Albans Bay was 180 acres. So it was a substantial, it was a pretty good scale. And the treatment that they did there was not a eradication, it was a little bit lower. It was more to see if the effects of suppressing veligers. And so instead of targeting 0.2 milligrams per liter as copper, they targeted 0.06 milligrams per liter as copper. So it was quite a low dose, and it was only for 10 days. And what they saw there, and I do encourage people to look at it, is a very nice study, and it's currently being written up for publication in a journal. But they looked at impacts on non-targets as well. And that included native mussels. Fat mucket is the name of the native mussel, and it included fathead minnow, as you said, and perch, I believe, yellow perch, and some other species. And the species that took the biggest hit was the fathead minnow. And there are certain species that are used in toxicology, ecotoxicology, to measure impacts on the environment. And fathead minnow is one of them. And salmonids like trout, rainbow trout, or Omicus is the species name. Those are used as indicator species precisely because they are very sensitive. And so, yeah, I would predict we kill the fathead minnow. That USGS study is the only, field experience that I know of where they actually measured it, but I would fully anticipate that when we go out and try to eradicate the zebra mussels, we will kill a bunch of fathead minnow too. But that's just kind of one of the prices you pay. I mean, any pesticide is a trade-off. It's the holy grail of pesticides to find a pesticide that only kills the pest. But it's very rare to have a pesticide that only kills the pest. There's always, or almost always, some bykill, some side effects. And that's going to be a side effect of eradicating the zebra mussels, is you're going to kill some fathead minnow, but those fathead minnow will come back. How quickly, I can't say for sure, but quickly, weeks or months. And the hope is that the zebra mussels do not come back, because you've eradicated them. So that to do a treatment like this, you do have to be willing to tolerate a temporary impact on some of those non-targets. It's just that what we found is this is the safest of all the alternatives out there. This seems to be the one where you use the least amount of copper, and we have the least impacts on non-target species. And I had always had to assume, in the absence of knowing otherwise, I always had to assume that, well, the native mussels, yeah, we probably kill the native mussels too. If we're killing the zebra mussels, we probably are killing the native mussels too. But at least, we know that the native mussels are going to be wiped out if we don't do anything about the zebra mussels, because that's known. That's what the zebra mussels, they smother them and they exterminate. They eradicate. They become extinct. So, can we apply a pesticide for 40 days and remove the invasive species so that the native mussels can come back and thrive? That's the goal. And what this USGS study showed is that, to our surprise, the fat mucket native mussels didn't die from the EarthTech QZ treatment. The zebra mussels did die, but the natives did not. And so we were surprised and happy to see that they didn't. Now, why didn't they die? We're not 100% sure, but we think it's because they are bigger and they're slower feeding. The zebra mussels are very voracious. They filter quickly, a lot of water, and so they therefore accumulate more of the copper in their tissues, and they die faster. But there was not a single dead fat mucket native mussel in that study. So I hope that answers your question satisfactorily.
Excellent. And if not, feel free to follow up in the chat. Another question that's asked, presuming the zebra mussels can indeed be eradicated here at ACL, and you've touched a little bit on some of this, so maybe this might just be kind of summarizing all this. Presuming that zebra mussels can indeed be eradicated at Apple Canyon Lake, what efforts or actions will Apple Canyon Lake need to enact or consider in order to mitigate the reinfestation? I know you mentioned lake monitoring and potentially like the hot water cleaning and things like that. What would that picture look like?
Yeah, I think we answered it before. I'm happy to answer it again, but it's sort of repeating. You're just going to have to police the introduction of boats. At other lakes, they've done things like they've closed all but 2 boat ramps, and any boat has to come in now through only 1 or 2 locations, and those are locations that we're now going to monitor. Maybe they're not monitored 24/7. Maybe they're monitored just 8 or 10 hours a day, but that's better than nothing. You just do your best to restrict the possibility of reintroduction, and that's just going to depend on the resources that you have available, money and people, and your appetite for policing that. So those are some of the things that can and probably should be done. Even if you don't pursue eradication, you're probably going to want to institute some of these policies, both for boats entering and boats leaving the lake, because, as I say, you don't want to be sending your mussels to other lakes.
Are there plans that also include like native solutions? Like, are there fish that eat zebra mussels that have those been successful or anything like that?
you know, it's just a drop in the bucket. Yeah, there are fish, like there's this red ear sunfish is known to consume zebra mussels. Well, fine, yeah, they'll eat a few, but you know, how do you control, you know, 500 per square meter, much less, you know, 100,000 per square or whatever. They don't have a very noticeable impact. It would be kind of a distraction, in my opinion, to go down that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with introducing those, that's fine, but I wouldn't hang my hat on, you know, much bang for your buck from that sort of approach. It's just, and it's understandable people have pursued it because, you know, biological control is desirable if you can achieve it. You know, chemical control is really your last resort. You try to look for other ways to control a pest that are non-chemical. And if they're out there, then I would recommend them. And I do recommend them, you know, preventing the boats from coming, that's a physical control. And there's, you know, what people call cultural controls. It's like related to behavior. So, you know, those are things you're going to want to do, and biological control can be one too. But, you know, your last resort is chemical control. And it's just, the reality is sometimes that's the only thing we've got that really works. And so if you're going to use chemical control, let's make sure that it's the best thing available so that you don't have to add any more than absolutely necessary.
Thank you for that clarification. Another question here, again, assuming we go down that eradication route, has there been any need from lakes that have you've been successful in eradicating the zebra mussels, where there has been a follow-up, or there's been a need for a follow-up copper treatment? One, you know, like, is there one, if we do go down the eradication route, is there a need to like do it every year, or is that just if we use sort of like that targeted approach?
We have never had to go back. I mean, it's kind of, we never hear from them again, you know. We're reaching out to them to say, hey, you know, can you update us? And, you know, they'll say, yep, they're still not here. They're still not here. So I don't anticipate having to go back and retreat, but we would be prepared to do so. You know, that would be something that we could write into the contract. If we, let's say we got 99.9% control. But then a year or 2 years later, we find, oops, somebody found some in this one bay, you know, they're still there. You know, we go back and treat that bay. And, you know, we decide at that point whether we need to treat that bay plus the adjacent bay or shoreline, or, you know, we would respond accordingly. But thus far, you know, the only places where we've had to kind of go back were the places where we intended to do that, like this Highland Lake in Chicago, where they never intended a full lake eradication. They just wanted to treat the shoreline, and they're doing it every year at, you know, reduced expense. It doesn't cost as much as an eradication, but you know, they're taking this approach where they're just planning to treat every year and see if that's enough to meet their needs.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when you say eradicate versus treat, eradicate is the whole lake is being treated at one time versus sort of treating like those targeted areas, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, treat means applying chemical to control them at any degree, whether it's one place or every place. Eradication means 100%. And, you know, treating to completely remove them. And probably that means treating 100% of the volume of the water too, because we sort of I think we have to assume at this point, from the bit I've heard, we have to assume they're everywhere. They're not equally everywhere. You know, they're more heavy in some places than others. And so we would treat those more heavily. But you know, if they are not everywhere in 2021, I predict they will be everywhere in 2022, because, you know, that's where you are on that invasion curve. You're just approaching the part where it's going to take off. Now, you could wait and see and monitor, but I would say that it just makes the eradication that much more difficult, because you're giving them a chance to get more entrenched everywhere. And you'll suffer, another year or two of monitoring will just be another year or two of inconvenience of having them on your boats and docks and, swimming, jumping rock and all that. So it is an option to just kind of monitor and wait and see, but I don't really know the purpose of that. I mean, there's so much effort put into monitoring, and people, what do people do with that information? Why do they monitor? I don't really understand. We already know they're gonna, these mussels are they're just gonna be more and more and more. So if you're gonna sit and wait and monitor, it begs the question, why?
Thank you. And this is just a quick recap. I'm going to go through some of the questions I've just kind of filtered that you addressed earlier in the session. So there is a question: how do you treat an entire lake of our size, or is that even possible? Earlier in this presentation, Dr. Hammond went through, he showed pictures of the equipment, the boats that are used to kind of go around the lake for spraying and things like that. So definitely review the recording of this. And if you have more questions, we can definitely follow up on that. We talked about possibly that sort of leapfrog approach versus eradicating, treating the entire lake in its entirety all at once. There's another question here about the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center. And Steve Nelson, if you want to unmute and clarify, you can, but I'm going to try to read this as best I can. Treatment options for the eradication of limited scale. Oh, you came off mute. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so I was just looking at an article, because I think we mentioned before the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center. So they put out a publication for treatment options, and it gives earth tech and the concentration to use, and there's 4 different treatment options. But when you start on the decision tree, it talks about that basically if you have a lake-wide infestation, it's not localized, it says treatment is not warranted. So I'm just wondering, because this group was referenced before, and if I'm reading the decision tree accurately, it says if we're in a case like we're at right now, treatment is probably not warranted.
Yeah.
Now, I will say they do have a section in there that if you can isolate the entire area for 96 to 336 hours after application, and you've done all your decisions about non-target animals are going to be affected, and the water temperature to a certain degree, then you can treat. But when I read it, it seems like at least their approach is something this big, this large is not warranted. I could be reading it wrong.
No, I think you're probably reading it right, and I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I'd actually like to know if there's an author on that. I'd be interested to communicate with them. My feeling is that thinking that they're expressing there is a little outdated, but that has been the kind of mindset in the past. Has been, gosh, if you ever, you better keep these out, because if you ever do get them, you can't get rid of them. And the last ditch effort is, if you find them in your lake in one place at like a boat ramp where they probably came in, someone brought them in on a boat, and as I said, they can move around a little bit. If they're on a boat and they attach to a boat in one lake, and then imagine somebody pulls that boat out of the water and drives 100 miles to another lake. Well, that mussel is, drying out, and it's not happy. That boat gets dropped into the new lake, and the mussel is, their reaction is to release from the boat, like, oh, wow, we got back in the water, let's, drop off the boat. And so that's often how it will happen. Now, the thinking that this article is that you're referencing is describing is, if you catch that population right away and do what's called a rapid response, then you have hope of wiping out the few individuals before they spread to the whole lake. And there are people, particularly in Minnesota, who have thought once you have 2 or 3 or 4 locations where you find mussels, that then the cat is out of the bag, they're already probably reproducing, and treatment is not recommended. That's what they're saying. And
Right.
I would just say, I disagree. And the reason I disagree is because we've shown that, we can do it, and we have done it. And so, I'm circling back with those people, and I think I know who they are. And in fact, I'm friendly with those people. We debate these things. We're even co-authors on studies together. And it's the subject of discussion, currently. But I think that thinking is a little outdated and needs to be updated. And, the reason I say that is because of all the information that I've presented to you today.
Right, and I don't have the date on, I don't have the whole publication here, but I think it was 2018. But
Yeah,
you can
I'm not
probably
saying
find information.
outdated. I'm not saying outdated in the terms of like, that's fairly recent, but I just think that person doesn't know everything that I know.
Got it.
And we need to talk to them. And if they disagree, I want to hear why. Prove me wrong.
Yeah, because they actually referenced your work you did. I don't know if you did Christmas Lake, Lake Independence, Lake Irene, Lake Minneswasca, and Ruth Lake.
Those were all using Earth Tech QZ in Minnesota, and those were all rapid responses.
Okay.
And they were all successful at eradicating in the treatment area. And where they failed was in that the treatment area was not quite large enough. They subsequently found mussels outside the treatment area. And so, they're thinking, gosh, it failed. Well, it didn't fail really. It just failed because they didn't treat everywhere that there were mussels. They didn't know where mussels were. So they treated where they thought mussels were, but they missed some places. And so what we have done is just been more conservative in our approach. It's assuming mussels are, almost everywhere. And we have techniques for determining, mussels are like anything living, that they have their requirements. They need dissolved oxygen, for example, just like fish do. If there's a thermocline in the lake below which dissolved oxygen concentrations are too low, there's not going to be mussels down there because they won't survive without oxygen. So we wouldn't bother to treat down there. And there, there's other ways that we would decide where mussels are most likely to thrive and be, most heavily populate, and other places where we would, apply a less heavy hand, so to speak. But those projects could be called failures by somebody because they were unable to eradicate mussels from the lake, like Christmas Lake. They treated a bay and they tried 3 different products: Earth Tech QZ, potassium chloride or potash, and then this product called Zequinox. That's a bacteria. And, I think all 3 products actually worked. Earth Tech QZ was the least expensive and easiest to apply. And in my opinion, it's the best. Of course, you could tell me I'm not impartial because I work for the company that makes it, and that's all true. But, having said that, I'm also the senior scientist and I have an academic background. I'm an expert in this subject matter. And, I would say, prove me wrong. Do your due diligence to confirm what I'm saying is correct. But I'm telling you, Earth Tech QZ is the most economical, the most easy to apply, and the most effective. And their only error was in not applying it quite widely enough. And I'm happy to have that discussion with the folks who are, writing or saying the things that you just quoted. And I think it would be a lively and healthy conversation to have.
All right, thank you for the answer. Appreciate it.
And I do want to, there was another good question that, we covered it a little bit earlier, but I'll just clarify. What would it look like to treat your entire lake? And the answer is, we would probably do like what you see here at Highland Lake. Now, Highland Lake, they didn't attempt a full lake eradicate. They just treated the shoreline like you see here, the hash marks in red. Now, if we were to treat Apple Canyon Lake in an attempt to eradicate 100% of your mussels, I would still treat in this fashion. I would just treat around the edges and maybe up to 50% of the lake area, but applying product at the edges. And then I would allow the product to just disperse on its own to the center of the lake. And the reason I would apply it that way is because of what one gentleman said earlier, that there are some bays where there's mussels present and others where they're not. We know that they're going to be mostly around the shoreline. So that's where we're going to put the product. Now, there might be some in the center and deeper areas and stuff, but not very many. So we'll just let those get treated by the amount of product that disperses to that area. But we would apply it probably to 30, 40, 50% of the surface area of the lake around the shoreline. And that's what the treatment would look like.
Dr. Hammond, I've got a question. My name is Bob Ballinger. How does your product compare to Zequinox cost-wise?
I would estimate that Zequinox is 100 times more costly to apply than EarthTech Q, or to purchase than EarthTech QZ, possibly more than 100 times more. And also, there's a couple other things that just bear mentioning. Zequinox is not doesn't provide 100% control. It's more like on the range of 70%. It's a bacterial toxin. It's naturally occurring in this particular bacterium that makes the toxin, and so it's attractive in the sense that it's a natural chemical. But the reality is it's expensive to produce it. They have to culture that bacterium, and then even to have enough Zequinox available to treat a 400-acre lake, I don't know that they have that. If you start looking at the case studies using Zequinox, everything's kind of 50 foot by 100 foot. It's small areas, and they don't get 100% control because it depends on the quality of the batch that they've cultured. Sometimes they get 30% control, maybe sometimes they get up to 90% control, but they never get 100% control. So it's really not a eradication offering. It's more like, here's something natural and maybe it'll help. But it's at a pretty high cost, and those other kind of disadvantages.
And what is the maximum depth zebra mussels grow in? And obviously they grow in the first couple of inches because I can see it on my own dock, but how deep do they go?
Well, zebra mussels tend to be in the top 20 feet. They can survive, quite a bit deeper, 50, 100 feet. They're not going to be as many of them down there, in part because there's not as much food for them down there. Quagga mussels are the more versatile and resilient cousin of the zebra mussel, and they'll go down to 200, 300 feet. And that was shown in Nevada at Lake Mead. The city of Las Vegas gets its water from Lake Mead, and they had severe infestation by quagga mussels. And so they went to great expense and effort to build a new intake at 300-foot depth of Lake Mead. And they thought, okay, this will be problem solved. Well, to their surprise, they used robotic vehicles, remotely operated vehicle ROVs, and they saw that there were quagga mussels even down there. Not, not enough to clog their pipe severely, but in answer to your question, they can survive quite deeper than Apple Canyon Lake. But as you've noticed, they're going to be most dense in the top 10 feet and, top 20 feet. And after that, I would predict that they'd be lower densities below that.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm looking in the chat for some more questions here. There's one follow-up question. We talked about how there's the potential fish kill. Where we live in northwestern Illinois, there's a ton of bald eagles. Are you aware of any information or studies as far as like could potential fish kills caused by Earth Tech QZ impact the nesting bald eagles in our area? Or are you aware of any ongoing studies that might have some information available in the near future?
Yeah, no, I don't know of any studies on, to that level. That's of course a question of interest to me as well. But who's going to pay for that? And it's a big effort to do a study like that. I mean, it's easy to talk about, but that's a big, complicated, difficult study to execute. So I don't think there is one, and I don't anticipate anyone coming anytime soon. However, I can tell you that there was one instance where our product was used, and this was not a project that I ran. I only found out about it, where they dosed quite a bit more heavily than I would have been comfortable dosing, like 10 times higher than I would have recommended. But they didn't want to take any chances. They wanted to completely eradicate, so they just, really nuked this lake. And I heard later that they had noticed raptors like bald eagles. I don't know for sure that they were bald eagles, but they were other, birds of prey, that they came and started to eat some of the fish that had been killed in that eradication treatment. And they picked up the fish, started to fly off with the fish in their mouth, and then dropped the fish. They went to eat the fish, took off with it in their mouth, and decided they didn't like the taste, and dropped it. So that was interesting. That's just anecdotal information, but that is something that I heard about when somebody over-treated, applied too much copper, in my opinion. But it seems like, fish, they don't like the copper. They're going to move away from it if they can. And that's one of the reasons we would treat 50% of the lake, is so that the fish can leave that area and move to the center of the lake and get away from the copper, which they will do. And, I think birds too, they'll avoid it if they can, if they taste it.
Thank you. Joe Rush, you have your hand raised.
By the way, just, a kind of note of curiosity or interest, the same thing is true for us as humans. That limit that we have in drinking water that I mentioned, the 1.3 milligrams per liter that the EPA has decided that's the max that is allowed in drinking water. That's not actually a health limit. It's not that, that anything above that is going to cause cancer or something. That's actually an aesthetic limit, meaning that the water starts to taste metallic, starts to taste bad. And so, we're just like those bald eagles or those birds of prey. You get too much copper in the water, it starts to taste weird. And, if you get much above that, then there's problem, vomiting or nausea or, something like that. But those are, quite high concentrations, much, much higher than anything we're talking about here for Apple Canyon Lake.
Joe Rush, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Couple questions, Dr. Hammond. First of all, I want to tell you it's nice to see another product on the market besides Equinox that can be used for some type of zebra mussel control. Because like you had said, when you look at cost comparisons, I think you're right. And Equinox is so much more expensive for one, plus its availability for manufacturers difficult. But the meetings that I've been involved in, we've talked about that the typical population curve for invasive species slide you had up.
Yep.
I haven't heard any discussion of, well, wait, it'll go away. I haven't heard that discussion at all, and I think I'm involved in. But it's been this constant rise to a peak and then equilibrium. So the question is, and based on what you've talked about today, it sounds like you're very confident of an eradication. So if that's the case, that's good news. But if it doesn't, will you still, in the long term, end up with a typical population curve for these invasive species unless you do a constant treatment program?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's say that we pursue an eradication, and eradication by definition means 100%. But let's, just for the sake of argument, let's imagine that it's not quite 100%. It's 99.9% efficient. 0.1% of the mussels survive. Somewhere there's like some crack in the rocks where, you know, of course, even if they're sort of hidden in the rocks, they're still filtering water in order to survive and feed and breathe. So that's why EarthTech QZ is so efficient. It's so soluble. If they're filtering water, they'll be filtering our treatment. But, you know, nevertheless, let's say there's some fraction of a percent that doesn't die from the eradication treatment. Then what would happen? Okay, they'd reproduce. Let's say we treat in 2022, and you know there's that small. Then by 2023, maybe that small, you know, those few individuals reproduce and find another. And so 2023, there's a few more. 2024, there's a few more. Maybe by 2025, you'd be like, oh, wait a second, we thought it was 100%, but you know now we're seeing that there's a few more. Then at least you'd have the benefit of, you know, 3 years or whatever it was that you didn't have any mussels at all on your docks and boats and buoys and marinas and all that. And at that point, once you know that, oh, there are a few mussels here after all, then, you know, you could go and treat those areas. Whether or not your follow-up treatment would be lake-wide, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to sort of see what the data tells us, but you're going to get an idea of what's going on by our sampling methods. And I didn't go into this in the presentation, but you saw those settlement plates that they were using at Highland Lake. Let me go back here to these settlement plates. So we would place these during and after treatment. There would be plates like these positioned at locations around the lake. And yours is a pretty big lake. So we might have 20 locations or 20 or 30, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 locations where we'd have these settlement plates out there in the lake. And in the fall, when, you know, you've had what would have been a reproductive season for the mussels, if they're there, you'd pull these plates and look at them and see, are there any mussels on them? Well, so you're going to find out, you know, right away whether there are still some out there. And at that point, you know, we haven't had it happen yet, but if there were mussels still there, then at that point you could treat those places where they're still present.
Okay, I appreciate that. So let's use a hypothetical then. If they did not have an eradication, you would look at treatments, but it wouldn't be an ongoing annual treatment. You'd look at probably every 4th to 5th year, you're thinking, if they came back. Because like you said, that 0.01%, this lake likely was infested by one boat, you know, so that 0.1% could technically reinfest the lake. So
it could be one boat. I agree. It could be one boat, and that's sort of the assumption a lot of people have, but not necessarily. You could have had 10 boats, you know, And that's another kind of pitfall of that idea that the folks in Minnesota, they say, oh, we found them in 3 locations, so that means they're already reproducing. Not necessarily. They could have been brought in on 3 boats in 1 year. And there's a guy named Michael McCartney who studied that very in depth by looking at DNA and genomics. And he found that introductions into lakes that had become infested were not generally from one source. They were generally from multiple sources. And he knew that by looking at the differences in the DNA between these sort of tribes of zebra mussels. And, it gets into very, over my head genomics. But so I just, don't be 100% sure that it only came from one boat. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Did I lose you?
Joe, if you do connect back, feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, I did. I am back on. I'm not quite sure what happened with my connection, but it became unstable temporarily. The last I caught from Dr. Hammond, he was talking about the genome, and then I lost it at that point. I apologize.
Oh, just to say that there was this guy, Mike McCartney, a researcher at University of Minnesota, who found that most introductions to lakes were not from a single source, not from a single boat. And so it's quite likely that Apple Canyon Lake has been infested more than once. Don't assume, it could be that there was just one boat that brought them in, but it's also quite possible that, you've had 3, 5, 10 boats that brought mussels in either the same year or in, consecutive years.
Okay, I guess the crux of it would be, though, it takes a very small population of mussels to repopulate that entire lake because of their growth rates and their reproductive capacity. I think he said 200 sperm or 200 million sperm, 100 million eggs. I think something like that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the one concern I would have is that over a long term, if it sounds like you're very confident in eradication, I want to make sure I'm clear on that. That's a good thing.
I am.
That's a good thing.
You got that right. Yes, I'm confident in the eradication. And, there's details I still don't know yet because, I've never been there. We haven't looked at the water chemistry and all that stuff. But there's nothing that I've heard about your lake that would make me concerned at all. It's kind of the reverse. I think it looks to me like we'd be very successful there. We've had other more challenging environments. So yes, I am confident in the potential for eradication there.
Okay. The other thing I would note that you've talked about is that there was some questions about fish kills. Your low dose copper treatments likely wouldn't have a lot of fish killed, but the concern would be what it's doing to the fish community from the forage base. Looking at your slide talking about zooplankton before and after treatments, the timing of the treatment and the drop in zooplankton may be critical to the forage base for young of the year fish. So you may have your class strength or your class issues. If you did it one time, it would be one concern. If you're doing it every year, it would be a different concern. But you see that drop in the zooplankton community and how that would impact timing for the forage needs of your game fish.
Yeah, I would agree that those would be interesting parameters to take into consideration for deciding when to treat. I'm not really a fish expert, so as far as you're talking about young of the year and when is their most susceptible period for foraging, I'm all ears. Tell me what you think would be. No, I'm not saying right this second, but those are the sorts of details we would take into consideration as we decide when is the most advantageous time, or when's the best time to treat. I would just say that remind you that the impacts are pretty short-lived. And yeah, maybe the fish will go hungry for a week or two, but you know, we haven't seen fish kills. So they get through it, you know. So it's not to say that there's zero impact, but I would just go back to that's true for any pesticide. And, you know, I understand, you know, I'm an environmentalist myself. I don't want to go out and spread a bunch of chemical if I don't have to. But, you know, people have different levels of what they're willing to tolerate. If you've got aphids on your roses in your front, or, you know, there's something coming after the tomatoes in your front yard, I bet most people will go to Home Depot right now and buy something, you know, pretty strong. So, you know, yeah, we don't want to do anything harsher than necessary. But what we're doing, I think we've shown, and other people are showing too, not just, you know, not just me, but USGS and other researchers are coming around to agree with what I'm saying, that, gosh, you know, it's true. It's not as harsh as we thought it might be. The native mussels are surviving. Yeah, there's a hit on fathead minnow and, you know, a temporary hit on zooplankton, but not enough to kill the bigger fish. And, you know, whether they go hungry for a couple weeks, you know, probably, we don't know for sure. But, you know, I think that there's a trade-off for every pesticide. And what we've seen is that the trade-off for this one sure looks pretty tolerable.
Again, I guess my point would be this situation, you're talking about a one-time treatment. If you impacted that year's recruitment and spawn of young fish is different than if you have multi-year treatments impacting them. And juvenile fish can't go 2 weeks without food, they'll die. Adult fish should be different, but we can talk more about that another time. But I appreciate you taking time to answer those for
And
me.
do you guys stock?
There's a stocking program for non-spawning species that are stocked at a fingerling size, so they're larger, less vulnerable to this type of situation we're talking about. But they have a fishery at Apple Canyon, and this fishery is extremely good. It's probably one of the best, at least at the minimum, in the northern part of the state. So there's a lot of concern by the community as a fishing lake, not just a multi-recreational lake.
Yeah, right. Understandably so. Yeah, I understand. Well, you know, as I described, we're even used in trout, you know, rainbow trout fish hatcheries, where, of course, their prime concern, their main concern is the fish. And so, you know, we would take into account all those priorities in determining how to move forward.
Right. And that is a good example as far as the hatcheries go, but they're not normally, they're artificially fed systems more than they are natural ecological food web systems.
Right.
In most of the situations, you wouldn't be dealing with larval fish in it, but
yeah.
Good deal. Thank you, sir.
Uh-huh.
Excellent. I know that there's more questions, but I noticed that a lot of the questions that have been asked later in the presentation talk about specifically the shape of Apple Canyon Lake versus some of the other lakes that have been treated, how there's that flow that we talked about coming in and out of Apple Canyon Lake, and then some questions as far as like follow-up treatments and costs and things like that. So I'm almost wondering, we're at 2 hours and 20 minutes, according to my stopwatch, 2 hours, 23 minutes. I'm wondering if we should gather any other questions that might still be out there and maybe put together a second session where maybe we could dive in a little bit more deeper. Or Dr. Hammond, what's your reaction there?
I agree. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. People have been very patient. I appreciate everybody's attention for, you know, it's been an hour and a half, and you know, we talked about a lot. It was never the expectation that we would answer every possible concern in a single meeting. You know, if you guys are interested enough to pursue this strategy or you know, look into it deeper, then let's have more conversations, and we'll try to put more details to, you know, what this exactly would look like. And they're absolutely right. The shape of Apple Canyon Lake is different. It's got those fingers and all. And that has a lot of implications that could be interesting. If mussels are discovered, 5 years after eradication, if they're discovered down in one of those fingers, then maybe you only treat that finger, and it makes it easier to follow up. But as far as like what we would attempt to treat, I don't have the hatched drawing for this Valley Low Lake, but at Valley Low, we did exactly what I described for Highland Lake. Highland Lake, you could see easily it's a circle, and we just treated the shoreline. But we just treated the shoreline at all of these lakes. We treated 50% of the surface area that was the perimeter. And in this case of Valley Low Lake, since they had the islands, we treated around the islands too. So we treated all the shoreline and out from the shoreline far enough to correspond to 50% of the surface area or less. So I would, quick answer is that I think Apple Canyon would look very much like that. But yeah, let's have, you guys have your discussion internally, and certainly if we were to move forward, there'd be a lot more discussions to be had, maybe a site visit, and you'll want to, do more due diligence check on things I've told you, and satisfy yourself that it's all true. And I look forward to talking more.
Well, thank you, Dave. I appreciate your time and effort, and we will get back with you as soon as we can.
Okay. Yeah. Lastly, I would, if you do decide to move forward, probably, my recommendation would be to get prepared, and there is preparation involved. It's not like just you decide and then you're doing it a week later. And these lake applicators get busy during the summer. Now this is a big project, so they would make, it'd probably become a priority for somebody. But nonetheless, you'd want to plan and get on the schedule, and we'd probably be aiming to do a treatment like in July or August, when the water's warm. And again, let's circle back about the question of the fish and the young of the year and those concerns. But in the absence of further detail, I would, have in mind, if you're going to do this, it would probably be, in July or August.
Excellent.
Okay.
Sorry, was I cutting someone off, Al?
No, go ahead, Sean.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. We do have a poll that I want to send out for everyone. Feel free, there is something in there to capture any questions. I am saving the chat from today's meeting. So we do have all those questions that were asked. I'll make sure that we get those documented so we can do some follow-up. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. So please feel free to contribute to this. Did you find this session informative? Like, what are your current thoughts? And do you have other specific questions or comments? So again, feel free to add in there. But at that, again, Dr. Hammond, thank you very much. This session was very informative. I feel definitely more knowledgeable about aquatic invasive species, as far as quagga and zebra mussels. So thank you again for your time.
And Sean, I'd like to thank Al for putting all this together for us.
Absolutely, and I'll echo that. Thanks, Bob Ballinger. Al, thanks
Yeah,
again
I agree.
Yeah, thanks so much, Al, for kind of being the tip of the spear on this one. We definitely appreciate you bringing in this new information. All right.
All right, thanks.
Thanks all. I'm gonna leave the meeting open for a little while longer, but you guys can feel free to drop off after you've either if you feel like participating in that poll. We definitely appreciate any input that you guys want to give us. So again, thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. A very informative session.
Awesome job.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking the time.
So my one question, because I had to tip out of this in and out all the time. If you do this in July, if it hurts fish, it can't hurt kids for swimming, right?
Correct. This product is used in swimming pools and hot tubs at concentrations 4 or 5 times above.
Oh, yeah, I remember you saying about hot tubs. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Mark, just so you know, yes, we're gonna put all the results from everybody forward, so everybody knows, okay?
Yeah, Al, thanks. Are you gonna post that poll here, though? I'm not seeing anything if there's a.
No, that won't be today, okay?
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay, that's what I was waiting for.
Oh, yeah, and Mark, if you want to hang out, like I think if I end the poll, it just stops anyone from adding new responses in. So I didn't want to end it. But I'm going to give it. I mean, I think I've given people a good amount of time. We got 9 responses so far. So I will just wait another minute or two and end it. So if you want to hang around, I see 4:32. I'll probably give it to like 4:34, 4:35 to make the poll available. But I will like sort of do a screenshot so we can see what were the results. And then yeah, it looks like there's 7 questions or comments that have also come in. So I want to make sure that we capture those and share those.
Where is the poll, Sean?
Yeah, that's we don't
We're
see
not seeing it.
we're not
I'm
seeing
not
the-
seeing it.
I'm not seeing it either. That was my question: is where is the poll?
Like to actually like respond to it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, if you go to like, so in the Zoom window, if you go towards the bottom of your screen, there should be like a little poll button. When I launched it, there should have been like a message on your screen, so it might be there somewhere. But otherwise, I've got like a little poll button at the bottom of my screen, and when I click that, the poll opens up.
Yeah, no, I don't see it down there. I'm used to seeing the poll just pop up, but I don't see it anywhere on my screen.
It came up on my screen and I answered it and sent it back. So I'm not sure what happened elsewhere, but I did get it and I did respond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marge.
Yeah, I even closed the chat box and I don't see it anywhere.
Yeah, let me again, I'm reluctant to close it right now because I think there's still a few more people who are responding to it. I mean, I can tell you guys right now for question, I mean, if you haven't responded to the poll yet, I think what I can also do is I could probably make like another poll in Facebook or something. I mean, it'd probably be better if like someone from ACL did it so we can kind of like send it to everyone. This was just kind of a poll for the closing of today's session. But I mean, like right now, like question 1 is, did you find the session informative? 12 of 12 answered yes. If yes, please select an option that best fits your response. And we're, creating a comprehensive approach versus do nothing, but just start monitoring. 11 of 11 said, go for that comprehensive approach. And then there's 7 people who have included comments. So again, yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I'm not sure if it's like a connection issue or whatever. But yeah, generally when I launch a poll, it should just kind of pop up on your guys' screen. And if you interact with it, you can. If you close out of it, I'm not sure, like if it does get closed out, like how I can relaunch it from my side. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, this is the
used
same
to- I've
poll.
lived on Zoom for the last 2 years and just, I didn't see it and I'd like to answer the questions, but that's okay.
This is the same poll that will be available when we post the presentation. So we're going to get the same information from everybody else at Apple Canyon Lake. Maybe if you didn't see that, maybe you could take the poll or watch part of the video and then take the poll from that area.
Yeah, and I'm just going to try again right now to relaunch the poll. I just captured the results. So let me see if I can end it. And then, yeah, let me try to relaunch it right now. And then Mark, let me know if you see a pop up on your screen. Yeah, and it just, deleted all the responses that were in there so far. But if you guys want to go ahead and fill that out and we can capture your responses and then just kind of add them all up.
Yeah, I don't see a poll.
I still have no poll.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just relaunched it, so I don't know what to tell you guys. I mean, unless you're using like a light browser version versus like the app or something. I mean, again, I don't know. I'm not really a Zoom employee, so troubleshooting their issues isn't really my wheelhouse. But yeah, again, what I think, what Al said, I think we can just make a new poll, put it out there, whether it's like SurveyMonkey or Facebook or whatever, to get those additional responses. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and end everything. So thank you all for hanging around for so long, and we definitely appreciate it. And thank you guys for your work with Apple Canyon Lake, and we will talk to you all later. Thanks
a
all.
lot, Sean.